Welcome back to Operation Freedom, folks. I'm Dr. Dave Janda, broadcasting from our ancillary bunker, linked to our main freedom bunker in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor. We're here live for you every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern, also available 24/7 at davejanda.com. One of the, I think, most outstanding aspects of this platform is the guests that we have that are experts in their respective fields. And there's a group of our guests that we have that whenever they come on this platform, I am immediately asked by our listening audience or our viewing audience that has access to our videos through our subscription platform at davejanda.com to get those guests back ASAP. And the guests that fill that niche most often are our guests that are involved in the aviation industry. And in particular, Lieutenant General Tom McInerney, who gave us great insight last week about the balloon issue. You know, look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a balloon. Because he was in charge of the Alaska Air Command, if you will, for a number of years when he was with the Air Force. And then, of course, there's Commander Scott Snow, who was a F-14, 16, 18 pilot who also ran operations for the Top Gun program and for the Pacific Fleet. And we're adding a third member to our Air Wing division, and that's Lieutenant Colonel Chris Koelzar. A little background on Chris. He grew up in Montana and attended the United States Air Force Academy, but while there, he stated he decided he wanted to join the real military and cross-commissioned in the Marine Corps upon graduation. He spent the next 28 years as an officer and an F-18 pilot in active duty and in reservists. He deployed overseas on aircraft carriers as well as land-based. And his post-military business career started at Lockheed Martin on the F-35 program, but witnessing what he described as the Department of Defense debauchery firsthand, it then motivated him to become self-employed as a consultant and small business owner. Now he's come to the realization that, and through the independent media, has opened his eyes to the globalist cult's plans, and he's on a mission to help families accelerate their preparedness for any contingencies. You know, one of the biggest attributes I've known in the aviation industry and the fighter pilots that I've been exposed to is their expertise in situational awareness. And Chris is bringing his situational awareness to you and what's happening on the ground with whether it's food supplies or water supplies or the geopolitical situation. His website is Ready Husband, R-E-A-D-Y, readyhusband.com. It's my honor to welcome to the Operation Freedom Show and platform Lieutenant Colonel Chris Koelzar. Chris, welcome to the Operation Freedom Show and platform.
Dr. Dave, thank you so very much for having me. That was a great intro, and I'm certainly amongst esteemed guests. I know Scott Snow very well, and just to follow him in the intro, that's a real privilege. So thank you very much for that.
So, Chris, I want to run a quote by you from a political analyst by the name of Gary Barnett, and I want your take on it. Here's what he said. Concerning the state, there are no accidents, no coincidences, and no natural emergencies or threats. All is planned. Once again, everything in politics and government is planned in advance, is not accidental, and any coincidence, natural or organic, is all staged in one way or another to either affect a certain outcome or cover up another. Believe nothing in the mainstream media or government. Trust nothing, question everything, and never accept any reports unless you can verify the real facts in order to find the truth, end quote. Chris, what's your take on that?
I love that you brought up a quote by Gary Barnett. In fact, I read his stuff every time it gets posted on Lou Rockwell and go to his site. He's in Montana, so I like him even more. But he's been pivotal, and some of the other writers on LouRockwell.com have been pivotal in me, because when I first started going to Lou Rockwell, it's anti-state, pro-market, and the anti-state part, being a Marine, that part kind of rubbed me the wrong way initially. But like you mentioned in your intro, my eyes have been open progressively more and more. I grew up as a Reagan-era kill a commie for mommy type kid. I just wanted to go into the Marine Corps, serve, fly jets. I watched Top Gun, Red Dawn, those kinds of films, and going from that point in my youth, and then flying off the carriers, flying jets, being in the Marine Corps, being a Marine officer, and leading and serving with amazing Marines. I was red, white, and blue to the core, and I still am from a patriot standpoint, but my understanding of the state and the capital S state that's aligned with the globalist syndicate, cult, cabal, any one of those terms are accurate, as Gary describes it in that article or that blog. I think it's completely accurate. I really do.
So, Chris, was there a particular event that awakened you to what the cult was up to? Or was it a series of events? And if there was a series of events, what were they?
That's a great question. Certainly the 2020 scamdemic was pivotal. But even before that, like I mentioned to you when we first talked, my wife is a huge Dave Janda fan, and we were watching you even before COVID broke. But COVID and then SGT report, as you know, has been very helpful because I know Sean personally. The independent alt media, the truthers, as I certainly like to call you guys, have been step by step progressively opening my eyes to what's been going on. And now I'm able to put the pieces together better throughout my lifetime of being in the Marine Corps and just U.S. history. What we've been taught is certainly not the truth, and that is what Mr. Burnett's alluding to there, that everything's planned, the pieces are falling into place. The globalists that have been at this effort for centuries, really, and even in the U.S. for much longer than we want to acknowledge, the Constitution was under attack immediately. Their plan is falling into place, and it's up to patriots to band together and oppose it, certainly.
So I mentioned situational awareness, Chris, in one of the main attributes, one of the significant attributes of a fighter pilot. So when you survey the landscape of our country and the world, what's your biggest concern?
Biggest concern is the fact that our government has been wholly given over to the syndicate. It really has. If you look at the level of evil that's happening, so many different examples, and the military being a clown show at the leadership level, of course. I can't imagine the hearts of the people that joined for the same reasons I did, that are serving, that maybe have been kicked out because they wouldn't get the vax at year 19 on the way to their 20-year retirement, or are under... have gotten dishonorable discharges and all those other things that great Americans like Todd Callender are helping them oppose. I can't imagine being in that position now. So the fact that the military, which should embody really the greatest principles, the willingness to go and serve and die for its nation, is being used as a pawn and potentially positioned to go off in some completely evil money laundering scheme in Ukraine and step up, and we may have American blood. We may already have American blood being spilled in and out of uniform over there for all we really know. That is the greatest tragedy in my mind. And certainly I'm biased because I spent so much time in the Marine Corps and grew up wanting to do nothing more than serve the country. But it breaks my heart, and I can't imagine being out there at the pointy tip, trying to be ready to go do the will of your country, but knowing that those who are directing it are in the pockets of Davos and everybody else.
Chris, a number of people feel as though it's conspiracy theory when I say that the jab mandate has had an adverse effect on aviators in the military and in the commercial aviation world. So am I right, or are those that are calling me a conspiracy theorist, are they right?
Whenever somebody brings up the whole conspiracy theory term to label and degrade and condescend and virtue signal, I try to bring up the counterpoint, which is from the book of Isaiah in the Bible, Isaiah 8. It said, "Do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy, and do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. That is the verse for the alt media, for conservatives, for patriots in the U.S. right now, because that's exactly what the Mockingbird whore media is trying to get us to believe, that all these things are conspiracy theories. And specifically the one you're talking about, aviation-related jab concerns. There is so much data and so many studies and so many anecdotal stories of problems and people having heart attacks or reactions or you name it, especially in aviation. It is a huge danger. For somebody to label you as a conspiracy theorist with respect to having a concern over the way the FAA has lowered the EKG requirements, certainly it goes back to Gary Burnett's article. That is no accident. That is pre-planned, just like they changed the vinyl chloride danger definitions on the CDC website after not being touched for 17 years. It is all planned. So my long-winded answer to you is that is completely legitimate, and we should all be concerned flying airliners now with a pilot corps that was mainly mandated to have this bioweapon jab. We should all be concerned for the status of the pilots.
Folks, we're speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Chris Koelzar. Chris, if at the time you were in active duty and you were going to, and they instituted the jab mandate, what would you have done?
When I was on active duty, before I became a Christian and changed my worldview to that of a biblical worldview, before I understood all these things that we're talking about today, I hate to say it, but a 30-year-old Chris Koelzar probably would have gotten the jab. I got the anthrax shots. I figured I was out there. I wanted to fly jets. If that was the price of flying F-18s and serving with those people and flying off the carriers, I got shot number 1 and 2, and then I didn't get the third one. I avoided that one because I started getting a little nervous about anthrax. And I got to believe that anthrax was not good and probably had a lot of similar potential problems. So, unfortunately, Dave, I probably would have gotten it at that time. Now, knowing what I do today, I certainly would have refused it and taken whatever consequences that came my way because of it, as our thousands of service members have done here in the last couple of years.
You know, Chris, when you're up as a fighter pilot, you're always worried about the enemy and either whether on the ground or in the air taking a shot at you. But pun intended, one of the biggest concerns I'm hearing from some folks that are involved as fighter pilots at this point is they're also worried about shots to get into the cockpit, as you've outlined, that because they're seeing some of their fellow aviators having issues. So, Chris, this adds another level of concern. And what I'm told by some aviators is, look, the more concerns you have under the canopy, the better chance something's going to go wrong and that you're not going to make the appropriate decision when you need to make it. Do you believe that's accurate?
I do. It's all about risk management. And when you're flying as a single pilot aircraft, crewed aircraft, you name it, in aircraft, it can be a little more serious to have a good risk management plan. But in any kind of dynamic environment, whether it's on the ground or in the air, you need to manage your risks. And you've got, in a fighter cockpit, especially as a single pilot, there are so many things going on. And automation in the modern aircraft helps to an extent, but in some ways it exacerbates it too, because it gives you so much data that you got to somehow turn into information. You're always sucking in all the data, figuring out how to make that into information, what to do, what it means, balancing all the different risks, acting and OODA looping, if you're familiar with that term, observing, orienting, deciding, and acting, and doing that as fast and accurately as possible continuously. That having a concern of your health because you were forced to get an mRNA experimental treatment that was falsely lied to you and marketed as a vaccine, I would not want that concern in the back of my mind every time I went flying, especially if I was in a single cockpit aircraft and I was the guy that needed to pull the handle if something went wrong. I have a heart stoppage or something, that just may not happen. So I would not want that burden going flying right now, certainly, military or civilian.
So, Chris, as a fighter pilot, what was your most, I'm not going to say scariest, because I've been educated by General McInerney and Commander Snow. As fighter pilots, we don't get scared; we just get concerned. So,
sure.
what was your most concerning moment in a fighter aircraft?
Boy, that's a great question. Now, looking back on certain times, there are three or four instances where I realized after the fact that I was close to dying, really close to dying through my mistakes, honestly, and those of other people, and in one case was a mechanical problem. But there was never a chance in those cases for fear or a high level of concern, as you put it, to really resonate. The only time where I had a high level of concern for a prolonged period, knowing what I was about to do was going to be difficult and put me in a tight situation. It wasn't on any kind of an operational mission, like over foreign territory or anything. It was in the middle of the Pacific, blue water operations, they call it, where you have to land on that carrier because you're out of range of any other land bases, blue water ops. And we had extremely rough seas off the south coast of Australia, and the deck on the carrier. It carries a 90,000-pound animal, and this thing was pitching up and down 30 to 40 feet, and they were doing flight operations. And so it was a night carrier landing, which most people have heard and seen and read about the difficulty of that particular event on a nice, calm ocean. But when the deck is pitching and rolling, and you got to come back in, and you got to come back in with any kind of aircraft problem. I had one aircraft problem where I had to come back in, and with a degraded aircraft, one engine. We had two engines. But that was the only time where my level of concern was higher for a longer period. The other times were just kind of split seconds, and once I got clear of the situation, I kind of realized, wow, that was close. But the carrier landing that I'm talking about, it ended up being fairly uneventful because the level of professionalism of the people on that aircraft carrier were able to monitor everything, bring me in, the landing signal officers, of which Scott Snow was on the boat at that time. They were phenomenal. And so it was a non-event, but for that particular mission, that was probably as elevated as my blood pressure was in the cockpit.
So now, Scott, I mentioned in your introduction, you're involved in ReadyHusband.com. So you've taken your experience in the cockpit and your situational awareness and brought them to ground level to help every person willing to listen. Educate our listeners on Ready Husband.
I sure will, and I'll give you just a snapshot of the why with respect to being a Marine and being a military aviator. Marines are predisposed, we're trained for being prepared because you as a Marine officer are in charge. The nation gives you special trust and confidence, we call it, with all the Marines that are in your platoon, your squadron, your unit that you have ownership of and responsibility. Stewardship is the best term. So you better understand the situation you're in, and you better have a plan for every foreseeable contingency and ways to react. And in the cockpit, flying an aircraft, single pilot, crew, you name it, you better have an alternate plan for any eventuality. And that can be in an F-18, that can be in a Cessna 172. You better have a plan if that little Cessna 172's engine quits and you're now a glider. And so that mindset of being prepared, living life with margin, having a plan, managing risk, what I want to do is take that and offer Americans a very concise, simple, practical 7-part plan that they can use to accelerate their preparedness. Because right now in 2023, every husband, every dad, and every husband need to be a ready husband. If you have a family, you got a wife, you got kids, and it's not just husbands and dads, it's single moms who are in the position of having to provide for kids. It's maybe a wife that has a passive husband because the satanic lullaby in America has turned American men into meat robots that are passive and watching the NFL instead of planning to take care of their family. So Ready Husband was started so that a plan of action is available to anybody that just jumps on there and goes to the plan. There's tons of links. It's a 7-part step-by-step plan that you can use to accelerate your family's preparedness.
Actually, Chris, what concerns me more than the guys that just sit on the couch and watch the NFL are guys that sit on the couch and watch The Bachelor or Bachelorette. Right?
Yeah, that's terrible.
And they think it's reality.
Yeah, that's a tragedy. Nothing short of tragedy.
So, Chris, when you assess the battlefield, if you will, what's the single greatest mistake families are making right now in their preparedness?
I would hesitate to put a percentage on it, but I would guess that certainly 90 to 95% of American families have maybe a week worth of food in their cupboard. Maybe they got $50 or $100 of fiat paper currency in their wallets. The rest of it, they're using credit cards. They're thinking the ATM is always going to be there. The bank teller is always going to be open. They've got all their money in Wall Street and mutual funds. They're not thinking about tangible preparedness, food, water, the ability to defend themselves, and then some kind of actual money, not a currency, some kind of durable, accepted, historically long-lasting money, which would be gold, silver, those kinds of things. So it is so simple to take a step from being an instant victim, which is what 90 to 95% of the families out there, I think, right now are, to being somebody that can sustain, even if it's just weeks or certainly months, ideally, when everybody else around you is losing their head because they don't have a loaf of bread and they don't have an ability to defend themselves against the mob that's now out there shooting each other over loaves of bread. And they don't have clean water, and they don't have 1 ounce silver coin to be able to go to the local farmer and buy some chicken and eggs. It does not take much. And so the first few steps in Ready Husband get people on that path to not be a victim. And it gives that husband, that dad, that husband the opportunity to be a hero. Because every husband, every dad, deep down inside, we want to be heroes to our wives, heroes to our kids. And in the event of any contingency, maybe it's just a hurricane. I don't say just a hurricane. Maybe it's something natural. Maybe it's a hurricane. Maybe it's something from the globalists, EMP, financial crash, you name it. All these things are very possible. But a few steps of preparedness for a husband can get them to be that hero for their family.